Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Talent Development Hot Seat. I am your host, Andy Storch, and I am so grateful that you are joining me today. I have a fantastic interview for you with my good friend, Dr. Richard Shuster. And Dr. Richard is a licensed clinical psychologist, keynote speaker, CEO of Mars Industries, and the host of the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Shuster, Food for the Brain, Knowledge from the Experts, Tools to Win at Life, which is regularly downloaded in over 100 countries. On his podcast, Dr. Shuster's guests educate and inspire listeners through their stories, expertise, and passion for helping make a difference in the lives of others. His mission is to help people become the best versions of themselves and, as a result, make the world a better place. Dr. Richard is a sought-after media expert. He has his clinical expertise and his podcast have been featured in such publications as the Huffington Post, NBC News, Glassdoor, Reader's Digest, Men's Health, Cosmo, and now this podcast.
Oh, how about that?
Richard, welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Andy, it's an honor to be here. I'm a big fan of everything that you do, and I know this is going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I was just reading about all those experts that have been on your podcast, The Daily Helping, and I remembered that I have been on there as well. So it's good to know you make exceptions every now and then for people that maybe don't know what they're talking about, but they talk a good game. But speaking of people that know what they're talking about, I met you. I think we connected on social media, but we met in person at a podcast conference a few months ago in Orlando, and you shared with me a little bit of your story, and I was just so impressed with everything you've done and the mission that you're on to help people. And since then, you've come out with this really groundbreaking assessment tool that I know is going to be really helpful in companies as well as on the personal side. And I want to get into that. But first, I thought we'd start with a little bit of background. I'd love to hear, who you are and how you got to where you are today.
So my story, is interesting in that I was probably the antithesis of somebody you would have wanted to have on your show in my early 20s. I was on my way in my mind to becoming the next Tony Stark, and not the cool Tony Stark who was the Avenger, the really narcissistic, horrible, selfish Tony Stark before he became Iron Man. And my story was I bid on, in my early 20s, a government contract with the Department of Defense, not for weapons, but it was software related. And I won it. And I had no business winning it, but I did. And all of a sudden now I'm in this world of technology and working with the government. And I, in my mind, was building an empire and started focusing a lot of my time and energy on things like what I thought an empire builder should have, like boats. And I would literally go on eBay and look for islands for sale and things of that nature. And that was my world. I never wanted to have a family. I never wanted to get married. I never really cared about, at that point, anything but money. And that's not how I was raised. All of this was post-college for me. And then on one day, I had a life-changing experience in which I was in a horrific car accident in which I broke my spine, injured a number of organs, and almost tore every ligament in my neck. And there's been a lot of research in neuroscience and what happens to us when we're about to die. And a lot of people hear that cliche, oh, I see my life flash before my eyes. It doesn't exactly work that way. What happens a lot of times, and we have accounts of soldiers who have experienced this going back prior to World War I even, is that the brain, when it senses imminent danger, a lot of times will slow you down to the degree, kind of think Neo in the Matrix when he's first experiencing those bullets moving by in slow motion. So this car accident that I was in, maybe 3 seconds from when the first car hits me, my airbag is deployed, I'm sent spinning into oncoming traffic, I get hit again, and then sent back the opposite way and ultimately crash into a telephone pole, which stopped my momentum. That was literally a blink of an eye. And yet in that moment, I'm having this full-on dialogue with myself. And it wasn't one of these like a Christmas story, dear God, if you let me live tomorrow, I'm going to go give presents to orphan boys or girls. I was dead, Andy. I knew that I was dead. And as I'm watching the center console crush into my ribs and seeing the light refract off these little pieces of my windshield that are floating in the air, I had this conversation with myself, and I was overwhelmed with shame and guilt. And shame in that I have accomplished very little in my life that's of worthy and value. Guilt that my parents were about to get a phone call that I was dead. And I was just terrified at how I let a life, even at that young age, go to waste. And so that's really what began a journey for me of changing gears and doing things that are more altruistic and help people in a lot of different ways.
Man, what a life-changing event that must have been. And you hear that a lot, right? And for people in life, maybe it's not always a car accident that almost kills them, but people are going in one direction and just blind to everything else going on in life until something hits them someday, they're a tragedy or something else wakes them up. So it sounds like you started to make some big changes from there. How did you get into everything that you're doing now in, this mission of helping people, the podcast, the practice, the assessment, everything else you're doing?
It's so interesting. Timing is everything, right? And sometimes success in life and in business comes from accidentally being in the right place at the right time. So after the fallout of all of this, and when I mustered the courage to walk away from my company, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with my life. I was extremely overwhelmed with fear and regret and wasn't sure what my next course of action was. And I did heal, of course, and I can walk and do everything that I always used to be able to do, and I'm very lucky where I broke my back physically. But in terms of my life, I mean, I was just devastated. And if Instacart had existed then, I'm not sure what my life would be now, because the only reason I really left the house was to go to the grocery store. And on one particular day, when I was going to get groceries, I overheard two women talking about their teenage daughters and their behaviors on social media. And because I had this background in networking and technology, I interjected myself into their conversation, which wasn't even something that I really regularly would do anyway, and just gave them some advice. And in doing that, their eyes got really big, and I probably scared them more than I helped them, which wasn't my intent. And they asked me to come speak at their PTA. And that led me to starting to speak about technology and how to use it to help families and protect them. This was pre cell phones. And then at one of these schools where I spoke, I was asked to be a mentor, which gave me kind of a sample of pseudotherapy. It wasn't really therapy, but I was like, this could be something. And I returned to graduate school and obtained a couple masters and ultimately my doctorate in clinical psychology, where I had advanced training in forensic and neuropsychology. But it was really working with patients was a great honor. And I was always grateful to be. Anybody who's in the helping profession will tell you that it's an honor to be a part of somebody's change process. And yet I wanted to go bigger and help people on a broader scale. And that was really the impetus for me creating the podcast. But in terms of the psychological assessments, I felt as a clinician, because assessments are all that I did. Many who are in this space that I worked in would do principally therapy, right? Psychotherapy, and then do assessment as they had to. All I did was assessment. And on one hand, I loved it because I'm a scientist. And so I love data. I love numbers. I love being able to apply behaviors and evaluate them against thousands of people and be able to extrapolate information from that. On the other hand, the assessment industry is very pejorative by nature. It's extremely restrictive, and the gatekeepers hold all of the access. Many of them are extremely greedy. In addition to the fact that most of the assessments that you're going to take are not overly helpful. They tell you everything that's wrong with you, but they don't share with you how you can make changes in your life to improve. They just, here's the big red F I'm giving Andy about all the things that's wrong with him, right? And so I sought out to build a company that was different, and to where we created instruments that helped people improve their lives and help people in a variety of spaces and situations. So we have assessments for the military, which is ironic. It kind of brings me full circle in that regard, but helping soldiers and their families who've experienced PTSD and treating it in a very different way. We have assessments in the substance abuse space that take a look at addiction and recovery, not just at a personal level, but in a corporate level as well, to where our tool is unique. And what we do is we help individuals find out what are the three strengths that they have, the three things about their personality that are most likely to help them maintain their sobriety, as well as an evaluation of their current life circumstances, as well as in conjunction with those personality factors that are most likely to derail their abstinence. And so we've had a lot of traction with that in the public space. We've had a lot of traction with that as EAP programs in the corporate world. And we're talking to a number of state agencies as well as the DoD about using that for veterans. And so as it probably most specifically relates to your audience, we have an assessment tool for the corporate space called the Powers. And this one's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun developing this. And the Power stands for the Predictor of World-Class Excellence Rating Scales. And what we do is we took a look at 7 dimensions, and then there are 21 subgroups that are empirically associated with success in life. And notice I didn't just say success in work, but success in life. So we do heavily emphasize the corporate side of things, leadership rules, workplace performance. But we also take a look at interpersonal intelligence, which I know you know that the literature has shown that to be an emerging thing in the workplace, that emotional intelligence and its subgroups, which we take a look at, are really becoming on the forefront of things. So we're also looking at work-life balance and stress tolerance and dimensions of leadership and wellness and relationships with coworkers, relationships with family. It's a very unique tool. The feedback has been exceptional, and I'm very grateful with the opportunity to share that with the world, because it's been an instrument that looks at things very differently than some of the other tools that have been out there, such as the DISC and the VIA and some of these other instruments.
Well, that is some really cool stuff. And it sounds like a lot of work, first of all, but it also sounds like a lot went into it. And so you shared a little bit of the why. I'm sure people are curious about the how. How did you create this? Was there a lot of research that went into it? Was it more from your own experience, or how did you go about creating these different assessments?
That's a really great question. When you're creating an assessment instrument, and these took years to develop, there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into all of them. With respect to the Powers in particular, much of the research involved with the creation of this was around the big 5 personality factors. And so that was the seminal basis of this. And so as you're building out the questions and you're doing split testing and you're figuring out what makes sense and you're making sure that it ties back to empiricism, which is the most important thing, yeah, it's a very, very tedious and long process. But what you're left with is when you actually use science to peel back the layers of the onion, you're left with some constructs that are sound and that are exceptional in their capacity to inform the test taker about themselves.
You mentioned the 5 personality factors. What are those?
So what I mentioned was
Big
not
5, you said.
the big 5. So this has come around, the big 5 has been around for a long time. And you might have seen it pop up in tests that are known as, for example, the NEO-PI is one. It's kind of a seminal test. And so we have these different personality aspects that this research has suggested are generally a part of people's makeup. So the acronym OCEAN is one that's really been out there. So you've probably heard this in different ways: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so while there are many of those constructs that make sense in 2019, many of them don't. So neuroticism in particular is one that we're really not looking for neuroticism in the workplace in the same way that, like, the DISC talks about dominance in the workplace. That's not really a tenet that we look for in 2019. So using some of the research for that, we converted those into dimensions that make a lot more sense in 2019. And so we're not just using those 5 or versions of those 5, we're applying data and research from those 5 and then expanding on that with the other dimensions that we tap. So in essence, we're really measuring you when you take this and 21 dimensions. So each of these main subscales, and I'll tell you what they are: interpersonal intelligence, rational intelligence, cultural intelligence, work-life equilibrium, wellness, dimensions of leadership, and introspective intelligence. Those are our prime 7. And then there are subdivisions within each of those, which we refer to on our measure as success subgroups.
Wow, there's definitely a lot that goes into this. I wanted to, and I know we don't have time to go into all of these, and I'm sure people can go take a look at your website and the assessments after this interview. I want to dig into one of them in particular. That's the interpersonal assessment, and or the interpersonal dimension. And you mentioned earlier that emotional or EQ or emotional connection or interpersonal connection is becoming increasingly important in the workplace. And I agree with you 100%. I've seen that as well. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about why that is and why that's becoming so important in the future, why people should be looking more at that.
I think when the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0 came out, it really set off a firestorm in terms of awareness about this, because CEOs read books and then everything kind of trickles down. So there was a lot of excitement about it when that was released. This is something that, from a standpoint of science, we've known about for a while. And in fact, I recently read something on LinkedIn. It was a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk about emotional intelligence. And what he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of, you might have a phenomenal salesperson and he might be able to close deals, but if he's low on EQ, he is the weakest link in your company. He's the weakest link in your business. And so emotional intelligence is critical, because as we become more aware of it, businesses and employees are awakening to the fact that the way that we treat each other interpersonally is critical. And in fact, this is also in parallel with the rise of the millennial workplace and their desire to be purpose-driven in the work that they do, that the organizations they work for have a mission statement, that they're socially responsible. So there's a social connectedness within interpersonal intelligence. And the way that we look at it is we have 3 subgroups, and our subgroups are nonverbal communication intelligence. So how well are you able to read the nonverbal behavior of others? How well are your employees able to read the nonverbal behavior of others? And then sociability and social connection. So that takes it out of the nonverbal into the actual relationships. And our third success subgroup for this dimension is empathy, which is a key component, because if you don't have empathy, the social connections become far more difficult. And so we have questions that rate on all those. And the way that our scoring works is the algorithm defines your scoring in one of 3 categories. So if this is an absolute strength for you, it shows up on our instrument as an exceptional score. If you're compared to the general population doing well but could be doing better, it's intermediate score. And if this is someplace where you need some work, it shows up as a focus area. And so interpersonal intelligence is becoming critical. And it's very interesting too. We've seen in the East that China in particular in the last several years has really placed an emphasis on interpersonal intelligence and emotional intelligence. And it's been difficult for them because culturally these are things that have not been stressed in the past. So while it seems the West is taking to this concept more easily than the East is certainly recognizing that it's essential.
Yeah, they may have a long way to go just because of the hierarchical nature of how business has always been done there. And
yes,
people don't really connect personally at work, and they keep the home and work life separate, which, was part of our history in the United States as well, although that's changing a lot, especially if you look at the Millennial Generation and even Gen Z, where that's becoming a lot more overlapped. People are working from home and doing personal things at work. And I think more commonly, people are friends with their coworkers, right? And I think that makes empathy even more important. But I think a lot of people have different definitions of what that means. So when you talk about empathy, what does that mean, and why is that particularly important for people in the workplace?
Empathy allows you, I'll back up. Sympathy is when you have the ability to feel sorry for somebody who's having problems, right? Oh, your car didn't start. I'm sorry that happened to you. Empathy is really the capacity to put yourselves in someone else's shoes and say, I understand what you're going through. And it's important in business at a lot of levels. One, certainly from a team building standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, it's pretty self-evident why those would be important. But in dealing with customers, if you're trying to help them solve a problem, customers want to know that you feel them. They want to know in 2019 that you really get what is the problem that they're struggling with, and that you're there to be not just selling them a widget, but you're there to be a part of that solution. And so when you are high in empathy, you have the ability to do that. And it's really an important skill.
I believe that. And it's something that I've worked on a lot and I'm always trying to get better with and encourage people to get better with as well. I think that it becomes increasingly more important. I've talked about this on the podcast in the past, but getting a little bit looking forward at the future of work. I think in this increasingly digital world, where everyone is more quote connected, I think being able to make personal connections is going to be more and more important, possibly the most important skill to be successful in business, not just in sales, but building relationships in business, in companies to get deals done, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to move up in a company. And I think that we're seeing that with a lot of leaders that we look to now. And so it's going to be important to be able to look at your people, use an effective assessment to figure out, okay, how good are they with this? Can we help them? Are there areas where we can develop? And so to that end, this podcast is all about talent development. Can people use this assessment to now build development plans and figure out where to develop and help their people? I imagine you're able to identify gaps, but you said that was kind of a miss in past assessments that was only about weaknesses. So can this help people figure out where they need to go develop their people?
It can. And not only are instruments that are just about weaknesses a miss, if your instrument is solely about strengths, but not these other factors that come into one's life, that's a miss as well. I recently heard Garrett Gunderson speak at an event, and he was talking about a survey that was done of Fortune 1000 CEOs. And I don't remember the number of people exactly interviewed, but what he said was that overwhelmingly, the majority of the CEOs that they spoke to, well, financially, of course, were very successful. They had poor health. Many of them were divorced. Many reported strained relationships with their kids. Many reported that they had a poor balance between work life and home life. And so we do give you what your superpowers are. You are going to find out these areas on the powers to where you really shine. But we're also going to help you understand, how does stress tolerance impact your life? What does your relationship look like with family and friends? What are your relationships like with your coworkers? And so the powers was designed once we've completed the algorithm, and it's self-interpretable. So you could take this and you're going to get a 12, 13-page printout that you can go over bit by bit and learn a lot about yourselves. But it's also designed for consultants. It's designed for coaches. It's designed for HR and team leaders and organizations to take this as a talking point and utilize the results to improve these focus areas for employees. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for companies as well as consultants coming in to be able to put together a plan and help them figure out how to develop their people. One more question: as you're looking at this and you start to look at a lot of assessments and where things might be going in the working world, and you asked me this question when I was on your podcast, what are the big trends that you're seeing in the working world right now with regards to talent development, people development, or how companies are working and how things might be changing?
The most important thing that I've seen in terms of shifts, and it's similar to what you and I talked about on my podcast, is as the millennial generation, and then I'm going to back up. The millennial generation is the largest chunk of the population, and they work in different ways than baby boomers did. Baby boomers, were the traditional 9-to-5ers, right? Like they punch the clock and they go in and they do their thing and they go home. Whereas millennials don't do that. Millennials work very differently. They work when they work. At 5 o'clock, they want to go play trivia with their friends or connect in meaningful, and I don't mean that at all in a flippant or disrespectful way. My point is that they want to spend time with people they care about. And so then they'll go out and they'll come back and they'll get on their computer at 9:30 at night and they'll start doing more work. So when you have a workplace that's starting to emphasize relationships, values, and social purpose, if your company doesn't reflect those things, and in particular if your employees don't reflect those things, you're going to suffer, because that's where everything is going. One of my favorite people, and I was so grateful when he came on my show, was Bob Berg and his book The Go-Giver, and everything that he talks about, and that companies moving forward, I mean, he's really a strong advocate for this, as you know, that you have to be purpose-driven in the work that you do and not revenue-driven. And I think that is the biggest shift. And certainly companies exist to make money. Like if they don't have money, whether they're altruistic or not, the lights get shut off. So we recognize that revenue driving is critical, of course. However, if you serve to help others first, then the revenue comes as a result of that. So I think that's the biggest thing by far. The other thing is certainly the blurring of the lines and the integration that technology has in the workplace, and the rise of artificial intelligence, where the things that Microsoft is doing with LinkedIn right now is unbelievable. And I think you're going to see a lot of jobs in the next, and it's coming sooner than people realize, that you're going to see a lot of jobs look like telegraph operators in the 1890s, right? When the telephone was coming around, because the artificial intelligence algorithms are getting to a point, and we're not 20 years away from this, we're probably 5 to 10, to where they're really going to be able to replace a lot of jobs. In fact, they already are in a lot of ways. I guarantee you, people listening to this, you've gone on a website and responded to a chat and it's been a bot. It's not even been a human. And that technology is getting so much more advanced. And so I think people are going to really need to reinvent themselves, and talent in particular has to really figure out what are your superpowers, because when technology starts driving people out of roles, then you really have to shine to attract and maintain clients.
Yeah, I agree. I'm seeing those trends as well. And I think a lot of jobs are being eliminated while a lot of jobs are being created. And there's always a debate about, where there'll be less or the same amount of jobs in the future. By the way, if you are worried about artificial intelligence taking your job, a website I discovered a long time ago, and I've mentioned on the podcast in the past, is willrobotstakemyjob.com. I have no affiliation with this website at all. I don't even know the people that created it, but you can put in any job and it will give you a probability that your job will be taken by robots in the future. So for instance, I just put in customer service representative and it says there's a 55% chance that customer service representatives will be replaced by robots, which I thought was pretty low. I thought it'd be a little higher than that, but I guess it depends on what's going on. But anyway, I thought that'd be a tool to add to your tool belt. Richard, we're going to start wrapping up here. Speaking of tools, I know you have this assessment tool. Is there any other tool or maybe another book that you want to recommend for people to get more educated on this and help their workforce?
So in terms of a book specific to assessments, I don't. I would say in terms of talent development, and we're taking kind of a segue here, one of my favorite books that I've read in the last number of years is The Big Leap by Jay Hendricks. He is phenomenal. And
yeah, we've had him on this show.
Yeah, he's really amazing. And so that's a great book for really finding out what's your superpower and pulling back the layers and figure out how to utilize that in your life. The assessment itself, what we do offer, and in fact, I'll offer this to your audience as well, is if somebody takes the assessment, we have a comprehensive guide, a 54-page document on using the Powers test results to help you find your dream job if you're not already in your dream job, and we'll certainly give that away to any of your audience that uses the code TALENT to pick that up. Imagine many of your listeners are in their dream job, which is super cool, but if you're not, that's something exceptional that you could take a look at to change some things and increase happiness in your life.
Awesome. And I appreciate you mentioned The Big Leap by Dr. Jay Hendricks. Big fan of that book and him. And we've had him on the podcast twice. So go back and check those out if you haven't listened to those interviews. And I want to finish with where people can go to get this assessment, where they can get in contact with you. You mentioned using code TALENT. So what's the website and what should they do?
So we actually have two flavors of this. So the one that I'm going to send everybody to is seekyourpowers.com. Again, that's seekyourpowers.com. And that is the powers that an individual could take and check out all the good things that we talked about earlier. And then the website itself, overall, marsassessment.com, has the link to the powers for corporations and consultants. Very similar, just different normative data, of course. But that's the best place to get your hands on the powers. And again, using that code TALENT, it will get you that dream job guide as well for free.
Dr. Richard, this has been great. I know you are going to help a lot of people with these assessments and all the things that you're doing. And I love the mission that you're on to help people and to change the world. I know you and I are aligned and on similar missions there. And it's great that we're able to keep in touch, to be friends, to follow and help and support each other. And I look forward to doing more of that in the future. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast today to share some of your wisdom and experience with us. So thanks again for coming on the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It was great.
All right. Take care.